and it was said on this coming Shabbat, which exactly like this year was the 6th of Av, and it was Shabbat Chazon. That means the Shabbat when we read the Haftorah beginning Chazon Yeshaya, the vision of Isaiah, and the opening line of the discourse is from the book of Lamentations. Now, the book of Lamentations was written by Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu, the prophet Jeremiah. There are three very prominent prophets, the Isaiah, Yeshaya, Yirmiyahu, that's Jeremiah, and Yechezkel, Ezekiel. Then there's a set of 12 what are called minor prophets. They're shorter books, still very significant figures. And these are the prophets as they are collected. There's also Samuel the prophet. But these are the sort of poetic, prophetic writings. So Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah, who was prophesying about the destruction of Jerusalem when it actually was destroyed, he wrote the poem, the lament, which is called Lamentations. And Lamentations, we'll have a look in a second. A moment. I think. Right, I think we're able to find it here. Here's Lamentations. So this is the beginning of Lamentations. I think you'll be able to see it in a moment. Do you see it? Can you actually see Lamentations? Eicha Yashva Badad?
Yes.
Yes, you can see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is the beginning. Eicha Yashva Badad Ha'ir Rabati Am Haita Almana. So that is the beginning of this text. Eicha is like saying how. They translate, alas, lonely sits the city once great with people. She that was great among nations is become like a widow. Right, so that's the beginning of this text of Lamentations. Now, the actual catch text, so to speak.
No, it has to happen. It has to happen.
Sorry?
No, sorry, I should have been on mute. I apologize.
Right. Now, the actual catch text, in other words, the text with which the discourse begins, is from chapter 5. Zechor Hashem mehaya lanu. Remember, God, what has happened to us. Habita, look, ure'ei, and see, et chepatenu, our disgrace. And it goes on speaking about what a terrible situation we're in. And Yatomim hayinu, we become orphans. Ve'ein av, without a father. Imotenu ka'almanot, our mothers are like widows. So that is the lamenting atmosphere of the book of Lamentations. It's read on Tisha B'Av in the evening, the beginning of Tisha B'Av. In many synagogues, people take turns saying it. In others, you have one leader who says the whole thing, and it's said in a kind of a mournful. No, it's said by the Chazan. Where people take turns is with the kinot, with the actual the poems of lament. But Eicha is said by everyone, but led by a Chazan. That's the normal style, sitting on the floor or sitting on low chairs. That's the normal thing, somehow sitting on low chairs. Each synagogue has their own way of organizing that. And our synagogue's in a school, so we get chairs from the kindergarten, little chairs from the children's section of the school, and so everyone's able to sit on these very low chairs. Like mourners, because we're mourning Jerusalem, and the lights are made dimmer. The covering of the ark is taken to one side. So everything has this gloomy atmosphere. So that will be beginning next Monday night. So this is the discourse that the Rebbe taught on the Shabbat before them. Now, the Shabbat before the fast in Chabad or in general Hasidic custom is no different to any other Shabbat. Among the German Jews, the Yekkers, they make various ways of signaling that this is a very mournful Shabbat. But in general, for the Hasidim, there's no difference. Shabbat is beyond the limitations of exile. But when the Rebbe had a Hasidic gathering on that day, and I'm sure it was, I wasn't there, but I'd been in New York earlier that summer, as I might have mentioned to you, and one or two of the discourses that we studied together, I myself studied 51 years ago. I heard, didn't study them, I heard them at that time. They weren't, the transcripts of them were not accessible at that moment. But by the time this discourse was said, I was back in London, but I'm quite sure it was a very joyful atmosphere in that Hasidic gathering. But then when the Rebbe said this discourse, the discourse begins with this sort of gloomy statement from Lamentations. However, the Hasidic knetch, so to speak, the Hasidic twist of looking at everything in life is that it might seem negative, but it's actually a door to something positive. And so therefore, if we're going to be able to see enough of this discourse, we'll see how the Rebbe turns it round, or Hasidic teaching he's transmitting to us, Hasidic teachings which turn around the negativity and present it as something positive, with the idea that the deepest level of positive is discovered by going down into the deepest level of negative. And that's certainly our Jewish experience through the thousands of years of Jewish history. We go down into the most incredible levels of distress of different kinds. But then with the help of God, we discover the divine in the darkness, and the divine which is revealed is more revealed than if there had only been simple daylight the whole time. So it's through going through this paradox of descent into darkness that we come to the highest ascent of life. So in order to start us off, we will have the mimer melody. Oh, ya, 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 yo, ya, 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 oh, ya, yo, oh, ya, 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 yo. Hayre ramba, hoye yamba, om bayon, ya yere ramba, ya yambam, hoye yamba, ya yambam, hoye yamba, hoye yamba, ho ya yere rambam, ho ya yambam. Oh, yo. Right, I trust everyone can see the discourse. Zuchor Hashem mehayalanu. Thank you, Leo. Okay. Now, so this is the discourse said on Shabbat Parshat Devarim, the beginning of Deuteronomy, as we're going to have this Shabbat, which is the Shabbat of the vision, the Shabbat when we have the Haftorah beginning the vision of Isaiah, and it was said in 1973. Zechor Hashem lanu. Remember, God, what we had. Habito re'ei et chepatenu, or remember what has happened to us. Habito re'ei et chepatenu, look and see our shame. Hinei b'pasuk zeh, now in this verse, says the Rebbe, yeshno gam perush l'mal yutam. There's also a positive way of understanding the verse. Kafi shematzinu b'trushei tzemach tzedek, as we find in the discourses of the third Lubavitcher Rebbe, called the Tzemach Tzedek, Shemavayeh kama psukim b'Megillat Eicha, he explains a number of verses in Lamentations, kafi shehem lemal yuta, the way they have a positive meaning, uve'ofen nifla, in a remarkable way. So in other words, the third Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, his name was Rabbi Menachem Mendel as well. So Rabbi Menachem Mendel, the Tzemach Tzedek, he wrote interpretations of the Book of Lamentations. I think it wasn't written as a straightforward commentary. It comes up in his discourses, an interpretation of this verse, an interpretation of that verse. And many times he's taking a verse which sounds negative and lamenting, miserable, mourning, and he transforms it into something positive. Kafi shemevi kvod kedushat mori v'chami admor, as the previous Rebbe, who is the father-in-law of our Rebbe, and he says this b'dibur matchil zeh b'sefer ma'amarim Yiddish. Now, there is a discourse in Yiddish by the previous Rebbe, and that begins with these same words as this discourse that we're looking at now, Zechor Hashem me'hayalan. Remember, O God, what we had. So this is in a discourse by the previous Rebbe, and he taught a number of discourses in Yiddish, and the reason why it was in Yiddish rather than, you see, whenever a Rebbe, all Rebbeim, not only Chabad, all the Eastern European Rebbeim of the past 200 years, when they said a discourse, they would say it in Yiddish. The only thing is, when it was written down, it would be written down in Hebrew. So the writing down in Hebrew, in a sense, restricted. There was a time when it restricted the readership to people who knew Hebrew. The ordinary Jew in the street in 1920, let's say, the ordinary Jew in the street in Eastern Europe, he knew Yiddish. He didn't necessarily, he could read Hebrew, but not necessarily understand it. So in order to explain a complicated idea, he would need to have a translation. So the previous Rebbe redacted a number of his discourses in Yiddish, so that every Jew would be able, at that point in time, would be able to read the Yiddish and understand it. Now, today, it's the other way around. It's more of a rarity in Chabad for young people to be able to read Yiddish with that kind of depth, and especially in Israel, the Israeli Chabad. And so many things have been translated from Yiddish into Ivrit, into Hebrew, so that people are able to understand it. But originally it was written in Yiddish in order to reach a wider audience. Now he wrote there, Torat HaBaal Shem Tov, the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov. And the Baal Shem Tov said a teaching, She'amara, which he said, B'yushuv shel anashim pshutim. He was talking to what we might consider simple people, not learned scholars. But these simple people, Shahayta lahem mesirut nefesh. They were people, they were activists, they were doing things avur pidyon shuyim, for redemption of captives. Now, the Baal Shem Tov lived in the middle of the 18th century. And unfortunately, a very common thing at that time was that a Jewish family or a Jewish individual would somehow be taken by some nobleman, thrown into prison, with the claim that you owe me money, you were renting a house on my land and you haven't paid the rent, or things of this kind. And maybe they hadn't paid the rent. They didn't have the money to pay the rent. And now they've been put in prison. And there's actually a Shimon Dubnov, a Jewish historian. He wrote quite a number of books on Jewish history of Eastern Europe. And in one of them, he includes texts from a diary of a nobleman. And the nobleman describes exactly this phenomenon from the 18th century, how there was this family and they hadn't paid the rent and he put them in prison in his estate somewhere. And now the priest is trying to teach the young boy in this family to make him into a Russian Orthodox Christian. And they're working on that. And then, unfortunately, says the nobleman in this piece of diary that Dubnov records in his history of the Jews in Russia and Poland, Jews from Berdichev came along and paid the money that the family owed for the rent, so I had to let them go. Of course, saving this boy from being forced into Christianity and the other negative things as well. So collecting money for the benefit, for saving Jews who'd been taken captive in one way or the other was a very common affair in 18th century Russia and Poland. And the Baal Shem Tov is talking to a group of people who have self-sacrificed for this. They work day and night, mitzad ahavat Yisrael, because of their great love for other Jews. They are struggling to raise the funds in order to redeem people from different kinds of captivity.
Tali, can I ask a question, please?
Yes, of course.
So was this is Pidyon Shavuim, I would assume. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay, so did it extend to not only boys who were children who were supposed to be made into Christians, but also the Cantonists, like the boys that were pulled out of their family to serve in the army, and they would become totally ignorant of, or they wouldn't be able to observe Kashrus, Shabbos, etc. They were stolen from their families to be conscripted.
Unfortunately, that is a much more complicated issue, Hadassah. First of all, the Cantonists began later on. That began in 1825 with a decree by Tsar Nicholas. And it's a different period. The Baal Shem Tov passed away 1760, so
Okay.
we're looking at an earlier period. But the Cantonists are very, very tragic area of Jewish history, because the problem was it was the Jewish community which were forced to give up these Jewish children. Now, what the Jewish community, it's a bit like the Holocaust, where they have to give a certain number of people who are going to work in a terrible slave labor, and the Jewish community picks out people, the Judenrat, the Jewish committee, picks out people who are going to go into this terrible, terrible slave labor, and their most horrific descriptions of this. And it's the Jews who are putting the Jews in this situation. And it was the same thing under Tsar Nicholas. he wants a certain quota of Jews from the Jewish community. So there were chappas, there were men, Jewish men, who would kidnap children and sell them to the communal officers, who would then provide them to the Russian military, and they became the cantonists. And it was the most terrible, terrible thing. Now, my teacher, Shimon Abramsky, Alav Shalom, he said the only places where this didn't take place were the places which were run by Chabad. And I never actually found out from him what textual evidence he had for that, but that was what he told me. That only, and in fact, we find on the contrary, we find meetings between the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Lubavitcher Rebbe that we're talking about here. He would meet with the cantonists and speak with them, but it wasn't, you couldn't buy them out at that stage, or at any stage. What would happen was, if there was one child, they would take children from 7 years old. But if you would have to replace that child with another Jewish child. So it's a very, very painful part of our history. All right, so that's...
Thank you.
Okay, so let's just come back. So we've got the Baal Shem Tov teaching this group of men who have self-sacrificed, and probably their wives with them, they are risking everything in order to raise funds to get people out of captivity. So, Zohar Hashem mehayalanu. So now the Baal Shem Tov is translating this his own way. Gedenk God, remember God. Was ist geworden durch sie ma shebeneshama. What happened through there? Now, ma, we're going to come to this word ma in a moment, in their souls. Now, the word ma, right, the word ma in numerical terms, it adds up to the number 45. And the name of God, the name Yud-Ke Vov-Ke, just 1 second, let's just see if we have it over here. Right, so here it explains the word ma in a slightly different way. There is a verse, V'nachnu ma, what are we? And the word ma there represents the selflessness in the Jewish soul. So the verse means, remember God, what came about through the selflessness in their souls. In other words, see what great people these are. Their selflessness brought them to great self-sacrifice in order to get together the money to take people out of captivity. Habita, then he explains the second verse. Guck sich zu, look, saying to God, addressing God, look, wie sie seinen mechorefes nafsha. Now, the original Hebrew, habita orei, look and see, et chepatenu, our shame, our lowness. So the Baal Shem Tov translates it in a slightly different way, but it's got the very opposite meaning. Guckt sich zu, look, wie sie seinen mechorefes nafsha. They misuse their own lives, their own souls, because of their love of their fellow Jew. In other words, they'll go to the nth extreme. They'll risk everything. Not only will they go without sleep, they'll give up on the mitzvahs that they're supposed to do, perhaps, because they are trying to save someone's life. There's a very, very beautiful story about a person who he is trying to raise money to get some people out of captivity. And it's Erev Yom Kippur. And he has to find enough money to get them out of this thing. Otherwise, something terrible is going to happen to them. This evil nobleman is going to do awful things to them, which incidentally, Dubnov, in his history book, he describes some of the horrific ways that the nobleman would abuse the Jewish people under their control. So this Jew is trying to collect money on the eve of Yom Kippur. And he goes around all the synagogues and he's collecting money, but it's only a fraction of what he needs. And he goes to a part of the town where there are Jews, but they're not religious Jews. And they're sitting gambling together. They're sitting gambling with a whole pile of gold coins on the table and bottles of vodka. And it's Erev Yom Kippur, but these guys don't care about that. They're just sitting gambling. And he comes along, this Jew comes along and says, I need so and so much in order to save this family from this terrible captivity. So one of the jokers at the gambling table, he says, I tell you what, you see this bottle of vodka? Drink the whole bottle of vodka and I'll give you all the money you need. So the Jew, he drinks the whole bottle of vodka, we're really risking his physical life, but nonetheless, so this guy gives him the money and he's very happy, and he goes to the nobleman and he's got all the money that was required and he gives it, and the family go free. And it's Erev Yom Kippur and he's supposed to get to the synagogue. It's Kol Nidre. But he's completely drunk by now. He doesn't do any of the things you do Erev Yom Kippur, go to the mikveh, it's a very serious time. He doesn't do any of that. He just comes along to the synagogue. And when he comes to synagogue, they're just about opening the ark and taking out the Torah scrolls at the beginning of Kol Nidre. And because he's so drunk, he thinks it's Simchat Torah. And he sees these Torah scrolls, which is what you do on Simchat Torah as well. You bring out the Torah scroll. And he calls out, I donate a calf, as to have one of the verses, Ata Harei Soladas, Ki Hashem Hu Elokim, Ein Oid Melavado. So he's donating money to be able to have the right to say that verse. So I think it was the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Lubavitcher Rebbe. He said he has already gone through the whole spiritual process, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and for him it's Simchat Torah, that his self-sacrifice brought him to that peak of spirituality already. And this year, of course, Simchat Torah is also the memory of the Kedoshim, the people who died al Kiddush Hashem. In Israel, it was Simchat Torah. Here in England, it was Shmini Atzeret. But it's the peak of spirituality of all the Tishrei festivals. So this is an example of the Chepa. Zenen Macharef et Nafsham. They misuse their souls in a good way for their love for others in order to help them. So that is the talk that the Baal Shem Tov gave to this group of people who were able to give up everything for the sake of brothers and sisters of the Jewish people and help. So the Rebbe asks, Ach tzarich lahavin, we have to understand, what's the connection between the positive explanation of this verse? The The word cherpa means not shame, it means they are stretching their soul, their life to the to the nth degree. Shuinyan Mesirat Nefesh, which is self-sacrifice. How does that connect with the ordinary translation of the verse, which means it's the opposite of any kind of praise? Because the ordinary way of understanding this word cherpa is shame. The shame of exile, the shame of everything being taken away from us. Now, the Yuvan, okay, so we've got a verse which on the one hand it's saying something very sad, and on the other hand it's saying something very deep and positive. And the Rebbe is asking, how do you connect the two extremes? The Yuvan, now this will be understood by considering the discourses, the Hasidic teachings of the Rebbe through the ages, concerning explaining this verse literally, when it's saying something negative. How do they explain it? Because in a number of discourses, and he gives sort of the references to these different discourses, there's a quotation from the Zohar. And in the Zohar, the Jewish people say this verse. See, the Zohar quotes this verse. The Jewish people say to God, Zochor Hashem meha yalanu. Remember God, what was with us. And the request from God and the request to God from the Jewish people is also in this phrase, Zochor, remember. But it's like, and God says back to the Jewish people another request, which also says, remember, like God says, Ami, my people, Zochorna, please remember, Ma ya'atz alecha Balak melech Moab, what King Balak, the king of Moab, wanted to do about you. He wanted to kill the Jews. Umeh ano oto Bilam ben Ba'or, and what Bilam, the heathen prophet, answered him. Bilam said to him, I can't curse them. I can only bless them. God is forcing me to bless them. I can't do anything. I can't help you. And also it's written, Zochor et Barecha, remember your Creator. Bimei bechuratecha, when you're young. You need to remember your Creator, particularly when you're young. Because when you're young, you're full of all kinds of uncontrollable desires. And if you don't remember your Creator, then you'll give in to those desires. By the time you get old, those desires are normally, they're already kaput in themselves. But when you're young, then you really got to control. So there is, so in addition to the simple meaning that you have to do tshuva when you're young, because then you've got chayut, then you've got life force, because if you only repent when you're old and you haven't got the energy to sin, then the repentance doesn't count for as much. The repentance has to be when you're still full of life and you're still able to sin and you say, no, I'm not going to do it. I repent, I'm going to do the right thing and not the wrong thing. But in addition, there's another explanation from the Midrash. But when it says when you're young, it's talking about the time of the temple. The temple is called Beit HaBchira, the chosen house, the house of being chosen. So so it's saying repent when you should remember Sheyizkor Beit HaBchira, you should remember the temple at the time when it was standing properly. So in other words, God is saying to us, remember what it was like in temple times. As the Tzemach Tzedek quotes from one of the commentaries on the Zohar. What does it mean, remember? Through the fact that we remember the kindness of God and the wonders which he did in ancient times, we again arouse God himself with that power with which he did all those miracles. And it's like the mitzvah of remembering going out of Egypt. And God commanded us to remember the going out of Egypt. And through this, we actually have the power to quell the root of the klipa of Paro. The impure force of Paro is quelled by the fact that we remember the going out of Egypt. So today too, we are facing all kinds of negative forces, but by us remembering clearly in our mind the divine power of God, we are able to see through all these forces, and that ultimately goodness and godliness and the Jewish people will prevail in the most positive way. And so that's what it means. My people, remember what Balak counseled against you. He wanted to destroy the Jewish people. This remembering is in order to awaken the upper power that helped you in the time of Balak and Bilam. There was a revelation of God that forced Bilam, instead of giving a curse to the Jewish people, again and again and again, he had to bless them. And so similarly, when we remember the temple, using that interpretation of your Zechor Yemei B'chudatecha, remember your creator of the, now not of your personal youth, but of the youth, but of the chosenness of our temple. Remember the temple. And through remembering the temple, we negate the whole idea of destruction and exile. I can just imagine being with the Rebbe in 770 when the Rebbe said these words. He was speaking on Shabbat. There was no microphone, there was no recording. But saying these words in and being in the middle of the summer, usually there were a bit less people in 770 because many people went to the Catskills for their summer holidays, summer vacation, and so it was a little bit smaller group there in 770. And I can just imagine the Rebbe saying that by remembering the temple, we dissolve away the whole concept of destruction and exile, and the absolute reality of that. That's how the Zohar continues. If we, the Jewish people, would keep that request from above, we wouldn't have that lower request, remember Hashem Mahayalanu. In other words, if we would have kept the request that God makes of us, remember God in your youth, remember the temple, then we wouldn't have had to have the other kind of remembrance, which was the product of exile, of destruction. But nosaf to that, in addition, now here we have from this beautiful book of discourses in Yiddish, another story about the Baal Shem Tov. And it's the Baal Shem Tov is now sitting with another group. He's not sitting with a group of simple Jews who risk their lives and their peace of mind in order to collect money to get Jews out of prison and things like that. He's sitting with a group of Torah scholars who are very proud of their great brilliance in Torah. Now, it's one of the paradoxes of Jewish life that a key aspect of Jewish life is Torah, and Torah has deep intellectual dimensions to it. And it's unfortunately very easy, which is a theme that the Talmud often discusses, that a person can be so wrapped up with his intellectual prowess in his understanding of the Torah and his ability to put two and two together and extrapolate and make connections. And he remembers on this page what it says on that other page, 1,000 pages away in a different tractate. And he's able to string together these concepts in the most wonderful way and give a most dramatic exposition, a Talmudic exposition, which can lead to a terrible self-centered approach to Judaism and life. There was a very interesting book called The Tzaddik, an academic book. And this book, it's a sort of analysis of the writings of one of the great students of the Baal Shem Tov, Rabbi Jacob Joseph of Polonoia. So he quotes at the beginning of the book a passage, not from a Hasidic text, but from a text that was written in the 18th century complaining at the problem that was going on in society. There's an esteemed rabbi, a great intellectual, and he's the rabbi of a big community. And as is common, before Rosh Hashanah, the rabbi gives a resounding speech full of all kinds of Talmudic insights and things like that. And, or maybe it was in between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, Shabbat Tshuva, or maybe it was before Pesach, Shabbat HaGadol. There's certain times when in Eastern Europe, a rabbi would really show his prowess, how clever he is. And he's working on this with all books around him, and he's like preparing this very deep speech. And suddenly there's a knock on the door, and there's this poor woman there who has some terrible problem, and she's got some desperate need that she needs to speak to the rabbi about. He said, "What are you doing disturbing me? I'm preparing my important sermon for this important Sabbath. You can't disturb me while I'm doing that." And he drives her away. So this sort of ethical work, this Hebrew ethical work of the 18th century describes this kind of poor relationship between a rabbi and the community. And so here we have B'nai Torah scholars who are proud of their novellae, their brilliant insights in Torah. And so then the Baal Shem Tov gave a different explanation of the same verse. Zechor Hashem mehayelanu. Gedenk Gott, remember God. Was es ist geworden von unser Marsche b'neshama. What has happened to this selflessness that's supposed to be in our soul? It's covered up. It's hidden by our own ego and our quest to be known as a famous Talmudic scholar. V'habita, look and see, chepatenu, guck sich zu, look at us. Mach uns sehendig unsere eigene Schande. Habita urei, he's retranslating it. Not look and see, but make us see. Make us see how shameful this is. Make us realize what a shameful approach we have got by focusing on our own clever intellectualism instead of caring about other people. And so what this means, as is taught in Hasidic teaching, that just as there is in holiness, there is the quality of ma. Now this word ma, v'nachnu ma, what are we? So this word, as it explains in Likutei Torah, that means bittul, that means selflessness. Similarly, there is a negative. So just as that is a positive kind of selflessness, so in the negative realm, there is the equivalent, and that's mehayalanu. and that means the ma, the self, the self in the opposite realm, which is the ego. And that's what it says. Now, what does it mean, this ego? There's a verse which says that someone had a concubine and her name was Re'uma. That was her name, Re'uma. Now, Re'uma, it's like a feminine name which is there in the Chumash, in the Torah. Now, in Hasidic teaching, it explains this Re'uma is a kind of klipa, it's a kind of negative thing on a very high level, in Atzilut. It's a very subtle klipa. And it's the word Re'uma, you can see, Re'u means see, Re'u, see, ma, what? See how selfless I am. See how dedicated I am. It's a way of taking something holy and boasting about it. And that means that the person says, look how dedicated I am. I just want to make sure that you realize how dedicated I am. That means he wants to show off his selflessness. And so even the Torah mitzvah that he does and he learns, it's in order that other people should know about it. He's learning in such a way that he wants other people to recognize that he is a great scholar and he's very learned and they should have respect for him and so on. So those are two talks that the Baal Shem Tov gave on this same verse. One to a group of people with self-sacrifice, and he explained it in such a way that it's saying about them how great they are. And the other one to a group of people who were inwardly boasting about how great their Torah knowledge is, and explaining the same verse, but as a way of addressing oneself. Come on, you know, grow out of it. Don't mistreat the Torah and your knowledge of Torah in this kind of way. And in fact, if you are going on this route, like this group of people, these Torah scholars, one can go to an even lower level. As the Mizritcha Maggid taught, explaining a saying of the sages, Ezel Shoter. What is now Shoter means a fool, but also a person of unsound mind. What now, a person of unsound mind is like there's a legal definition over there, because you can't, the person of unsound mind might have inherited a big estate, a big farm. Someone comes along to him and says, oh, Chaim, you've got this nice farm. Yeah. Now, what about if I give you, you like horses, don't you? Yeah. Do you like my black horse? Yeah. Would you like to have my black horse and you sign your farm over to me? Yeah, I like your black horse, right? So in other words, now, is this a legal sale? The Beisim will say, what are you talking about? This person is of unsound mind. He needs to have what's called in Hebrew an apotrophos. He needs to have a guardian, a legal guardian who is looking after him so that he doesn't sell away this property to unscrupulous people. So what defines a person of unsound mind? So it says, how do you define such a person? Hama'abed ma shenotnim lo. He loses things that you give him. You give him something, you give him a few pounds, you give him a watch, and the next day you say, Chaim, have you got the watch? Oh, I put it somewhere. I can't remember where I put it. So he loses things. So that is indicating that he has not got the legal, Jonathan's listening, he's a legal mind here, that he hasn't got this legal power to control his own property. And you can see that by the fact you gave him a watch and 2 days later he's lost it. Okay, So then comes Hasidic teaching and reinterprets this phrase. Ezer shoter, what is a fool? Hama'abed ma shenotnim lo. He loses the ma. The ma means this divine image which is within. The Ikar Adam, the main part of a person who had Selim Tmut Adam Shabo, is the divine image, the image of man, of Adam, which is inside him, inside a woman as well. That image, that divine special image. Incidentally, Ma, you see, which adds up to 45, also is a way of thinking of the divine name, Yud K Vav K. There's a way of writing out those letters that they also add up to 45. So it's like the divine name inside the person. And the problem is that this person loses that divine name. He loses that image of what a person is supposed to be. Now, it says in the Zohar that if a person has this divine image within them, then wild animals wouldn't attack them because they would see this divine image within them. So therefore, when we're talking about a shoter, which is a fool in general parlance, so that means the person who is losing the image, the human image, but in a very spiritual way, the human image inside him or her, which is given from the upper worlds. And he's called foolish because he's lost it because of shtut, because of folly. Now, there is a beautiful teaching. Ein adam over avera ela im kein nichnas bo ruach shtut. A person only sins if a spirit of folly enters them. Now, that idea that if we had our mind clear, we would not make the kind of mistakes which a person does and leads to, unfortunately, all kinds of folly and very tragic outcomes of all different kinds. Well, if a person has a clear mind, they wouldn't fall into that folly, and according to the Sedra, we wouldn't fall into sin. A person might be tempted to do something that's wrong, but then they weigh it up logically. What a ridiculous thing to do, and they wouldn't do it. That's so. That's and when this spirit of folly comes to the person, it's not the person themselves. The spirit of folly is like a kind of an extraneous force which attaches itself to the person, and we have to be able to wriggle away from it. Now then, one second. Okay, I'm skipping a little bit. Now this also relates to the explanation of Rabbi Isaac Luria. And this coming Friday, as then, and when the Rebbe said this in 1973, this coming Friday will be the yahrzeit of Rabbi Isaac Luria. So Rabbi Isaac Luria wrote or taught on the verse that Moses says, God was angry with me because of you. Now, the point is, 1 second. So that's in Vayet Hanan, that's in next week's Sedra. So God was angry with me because of you. Before the Jewish people sinned, Moses was at the point of complete wholeness. And he could grasp the 50th gate of the 50 gates of understanding. But when the Jewish people sinned, then he fell, and he was only able to reach the 49th gate, not the 50th. But then, when he passed away, then he was able to go to Ha-Nevo, Mount Nevo, that's where he passed away, and Nevo means Nun Bo. The 50th gate is there, and he was able to reach the 50th gate on the day of passing away. And that relates also to what the Mezritch Maggid said, that Moses, during his life, he was able to grasp 49 gates of understanding, but the 50th gate he didn't reach until he passed the day of his passing away, or his actual passing away, because that's a revelation that cannot be revealed except with the departure of the soul from the body. The point being that there are levels of revelation of God which are just too intense for the soul to remain within the confines of the body. Now, how does this fit, this explanation from the Mezritch Maggid, with what it says, what Rabbi Isaac Luria said, that before Israel sinned, Moses was able to grasp the 50th gate. But once Israel sinned with the golden calf, he himself was limited. All right. Well, this relates to what we missed out. You see, there's in Lamentations, it speaks about the way that we're like a widow. Remember, we read a verse speaking about the Jewish people like a widow, and the being like a widow. This word almanah, which is the word for widow, is divided in two. Al-maneh. Now, maneh is the Aramaic for 100. It's like a coin of 100 zuz. It's called maneh. Al-maneh means not having 100. And that 100 is the 100 gates, which are twice the 50 gates of understanding. The 50 gates of understanding going from below to above, and the 50 gates of understanding from above to below. So not having neither the ones from below to above, nor the ones from above to below, that's the almaneh, that's the, like the widow, the one without the 100. And because of that, of being without the 100, so that is the whole idea that it's like a woman whose husband has gone far away and he's going to come back, but we don't know when. That's the state of exile. And about that we're saying, remember God, what has happened to us, see our situation. We're talking about the exile. And then there is the idea of this painful situation of widowhood, especially widowhood as regards our lack of consciousness of the of the 50 gates of understanding. And so I think what it's saying is that before there was that concept of exile, having come to Mount Sinai, and there was this tremendous power which was there at Mount Sinai, Moses was freed completely from any limitation and even was able to grasp the 50th gate. But then once the Jewish people sinned, that really was a kind of beginning of exile. And so much as there was the steps in order to repair that sin of the golden calf, nonetheless, that flavor of exile continued. And so from then on, he could not grasp the 50th gate, and almost no one can grasp the 50th gate unless they leave the world. So the whole purpose why we come down into exile is that in order that we should come out of exile onto a much more exalted level, because the Torah is a Torah of kindness, and so therefore everything in the Torah is really something of kindness. And through the whole idea of exile, in a way that people go to different places. Sorry. And people go to different places. One of you goes into exile to it like talks about distant places, and then one is here and one is there. Why? Because the echad became golel vabaria, Barbary, and another one to Sarmatia, wherever that is. The idea of going to these different places. Why? Because in every place round the globe, Hong Kong, Peru, wherever it might be, Hawaii, Timbuktu, I'm not sure if we got Chabad of Timbuktu yet, but we probably will. I think we have, actually. So wherever it is, for the Israeli businessmen who are there, wherever it is, there are divine sparks all over the globe. And the whole idea of exile, see, it's a fascinating thing when you look at it historically. You got the Jewish people who were in very specific places, indeed quite scattered over the globe already. Then came the Second World War, scattered them even further. And so there are literally Jews everywhere. And indeed, the upheavals of the past 100 years, the expulsion from Spain led to Jews being scattered to places they hadn't been before. So that means the exile is in order to reach those sparks which are on the lowest level. And similarly, the situation of the Jewish people. There we are in the descent of exile. But through that descent of exile, we achieve, this discourse is telling us, we achieve something great in relation to the whole purpose of what the Jewish people are trying to achieve. As it says about Moses, Moses was very humble. Ish Moshe Anav Ma'od, he was very humble. Mikol Adam Asher Pnei Adama, he felt more humble than any other person. And the Midrash tells us that especially he could see ahead to our generation. He could see the generation of the time of just on the threshold of Mashiach, and he could see that their service of God is in a way of self-sacrifice. And through that one comes to the highest level. As it says, there's a beautiful verse, my father and mother left me behind, but God will hold me. God will gather me up. My father and mother means wisdom and understanding. And it might be that we've lost our wisdom, lost our understanding, but nonetheless, God collects me up. That means the very essence of God connects with the very essence of the soul. Now, I've been speaking the whole time, and I've forgotten to stop and ask people how you're getting on. Are you still on board? Matitya, it's wonderful seeing you.
Tali, I have to
you
go. I apologize. I must sign off now.
Okay,
but thank you
Hadassah,
so
it was
very
lovely
much.
seeing you. Thank you very
Thanks
much.
so much. Be well.
All the
Bye-bye.
best. Yeah. Any comment from anyone? Gloria, it's nice seeing you after a bit of a gap.
It's good to see you too. And what can I say? There is so much to think about that nothing will come immediately. It has to be deeply considered, I think. But thank you.
I think the central concept here is the idea that however negative something is, it's got within it the positive, which is hidden,
Yes.
and that's the real purpose of the negative.
Yes.
With the help of God, we should only have positive things. But if, God forbid, ever in a person's life or in any way there's something negative, what the Rebbe wants us to be able to see is to cut through the negativity and see the true reality of everything is the oneness of the divine, and that through us going into that circle of negativity, we come out to discover the divine essence, which otherwise we wouldn't have encountered. We would have just been in a kind of a lower level of the radiance of the divine. But it's through going through the negative that we actually come to that divine essence.
I think we need to know this now, particularly with what is going on in Israel. And,
Well, we have to hope that it should be revealed good and everything good in every way. And the world is crumbling. It's Israel and it's all other moral forces of the
Yeah.
West completely crumbling in an amazing way. And that should be the prelude to Mashiach, to the coming of Mashiach, to the whole
Amen.
change of the world order, that there should be the Beit HaMikdash, the temple
Amen.
in Jerusalem, in every way, in the most fulfilled way.
Amen.
So let us just go back to the last bit of the discourse. Now, this is what it means, this verse. Remember, God's what we had, look and see our shame, and then understanding it. There's the positive way of looking at it, the negative way of looking at it, and it all, they link together with the idea that there is there's the special spiritual quality which we have been given, that inner spiritual self, and that we sometimes lose that. We lose it in pride, in egotism, or simply in materialism. And however, or we lose it and in the darkness of exile. It seems to us that we've lost it. But in fact, it's all so that we should come to a higher level. So even our negative qualities are there in order that we should surmount them and transform them and go beyond to a much higher level. And that's the revelation of the essence of the soul, which is bonded with the essence of the divine. And this is expressed in the service of those simple people that the Baal Shem Tov was talking to, who had Mesirat Nefesh, and they, as it were, abused themselves through their going without sleep and without rest, and sometimes missing out on certain mitzvah because of their love of the Jewish people. And that concept of love, Ahavat Israel, is connected with the whole idea of what we want to achieve with this Zechor Hashem. We want to eradicate the reason, the whole idea of exile, because the sages said that the later exile, their sin was not obviously revealed, and therefore the end of their exile was also not revealed. Because the whole idea of the exile that we're in, is because of the opposite of the idea of ahavat chinam. Now, the opposite of ahava means love, and chinam means free, without any cause. Causeless love. Now, the opposite of causeless love is causeless hatred. The sages tell us the reason for the destruction of the Second Temple was the causeless hatred that there was among the Jews of Israel at that time. And the most shocking scenes described in the Talmud of the terrible causeless hatred among Jews. And what we are trying to do is repair that. And in order to repair that, we need causeless love. We need to be able to love. And looking at the Jewish world today, particularly in Israel, it's that love which is desperately needed for people to love each other. And through this, we achieve that midah keneged midah. We measure for measure, we achieve that, that there should be this revealed above, as the Mezritcher Maggid explains, the image of a father who contracts himself for the sake of his little child. And so therefore, we don't have to wait till the child gets older, But even now is revealed that idea of there has to be now to the little child, there has to be the revelation of the redemption, that we shouldn't have to wait any longer, but at once we're redeemed through Mashiach Tzidkenu, the king from the house of David who comes and fights the battle of Hashem and is victorious, and he builds the temple in its place, and he gathers the scattered of Israel, and the world will be filled with knowledge of God like the water covering the sea. And that's really the promise that this discourse is giving us, and with the help